Does Jesus claim to be God within the Synoptic Gospels? I often hear the claim that Jesus only claims to be God within the Gospel of John, and that John has a higher Christology comparatively to the other Gospels. However, I don't think that the evidence for this is actually strong. While yes, John does have a higher Christology compared to the other Gospels, I think that the Synoptics also have aspects of divine Christology, showing Jesus to be divine. And we're going to be discussing that in this video. I'm going to be giving examples of where Jesus blatantly displays his divinity within the Synoptics. The first example we're going to be discussing is in the Gospel of Mark, of Jesus forgiving the sins of the paralytic man.
A few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralyzed man carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus by digging through it and then lowered the mat the man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralyzed man, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now, some teachers of the law were sitting there thinking to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts. And he said to them, "Why are you thinking these things? Which is easier, to say to this paralyzed man, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, take your mat and walk'? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." So he said to the man, "I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home." He got up, took his mat, and walked out in full view of them all.
In this account in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus forgives the sin of the paralytic man. The Pharisees, seeing this, respond angrily because they know from the Old Testament that only God could forgive sins. In verses like Exodus 34, verses 6 through 7, or Psalm 103, verses 10 through 12, or Isaiah 1, verses 18, or Micah 7, verses 18 through 19, they knew that only God had the permission to forgive sins. So, according to their form of Jewish orthodoxy, it would be complete heresy to say something like this. The most striking features of this particular account is Jesus' authority. He forgives sins directly and personally. Like, as I've shown before, it's only something that God can do. Always in the Old Testament, it was God who forgave sins. When he heals the paralytic in Capernaum, the scribes react with such shock, because Jesus speaks as one whose word accomplishes forgiveness. It is clear that Jesus is not merely announcing divine pardon, or that God is merely using him as a tool or a mediator for forgiveness. No, he is exercising divine prerogative. This reveals a pattern that continues throughout the Synoptics. Jesus speaks and acts with a level of authority that surpasses prophets and teachers. His word carries the weight of divine command, acting and speaking as if he is God. Also, within this account, when Christ responds that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he's drawing language from Daniel chapter 7. Throughout the Synoptics, Christ uses the title Son of Man. In fact, this is Jesus' favorite term for himself, which he used the most when referring to himself. In the Synoptics, it's used about 69 times, so it's the title that Christ uses the most when referring to himself within the Gospels. Now, many people's understanding of this title is pretty much divorced from its historical Jewish context. It comes from a chapter in the Old Testament, Daniel chapter 7, where the Jewish prophet Daniel, during the Babylonian captivity, has a vision of a human being who's glorified and receives worship from all of the surrounding nations. This vision takes place after Daniel is given symbolic visions of empires and kings, symbolically represented as beasts.
In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed.
Jesus is drawing from Daniel's Son of Man figure and applying it directly to himself, a figure who in Jewish Second Temple thought, in writings like the Book of Enoch and rabbinic writings, was considered as a divine or messianic figure that is glorified alongside Yahweh and receives an eternal kingdom. In Second Temple Judaism, the concept of God being purely one person was not always the standard. In this vision, one like a human being or a son of man approaches a figure who is called the Ancient of Days, which is presumably Yahweh. From a Christian perspective, the Ancient of Days is most likely referring to the Father, since Jesus is always described as being seated at the right hand of the Father in books like Acts or in Revelation, where Jesus is also called the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, or when he is described as a lamb that was slain with 7 eyes, being presented before the figure on the throne within the book of Revelation. This whole prophecy is acting as a foretelling of the rise of Christ and his eternal dominion and kingdom on earth, and that all people from all nations coming to worship and serve him. In the Old Testament, there were multiple examples of God appearing as more than just one person. For example, in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis, when the text states that Yahweh called down fire from Yahweh in heaven, there's 2 distinct Yahweh figures being mentioned here, one on earth and one in heaven, which rains down fire on Sodom and Gomorrah, as well as the angel of Yahweh, who is distinct from Yahweh, yet speaks as if he is God, like in the story of the burning bush. Or when this figure speaks to Hagar in Genesis, and when God is speaking to Israel about driving out the foreign nations like the Amalekites and the Canaanites, he speaks of the angel who bears the name of God within him. All over the Old Testament, there appears to be a plurality of persons within the Godhead. This is extremely significant because if the Jewish conception of the title Son of Man was that of a divine figure, Christ applying that title to himself when addressing the Pharisees was clearly a claim of divinity right in their face. And this ties into the next episode of the Synoptics, where Christ is brought before the Sanhedrin after they capture him in the Garden of Gethsemane.
They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus, so that they could put him to death, but they didn't find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say, "I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another, not made with hands." Yet even then their testimony didn't agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus, "and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." The high priest tore his clothes. "Why do we need any more witnesses?" he asked. "You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, "Prophesy." And the guards took him and beat him.
Christ's use of the word ego eimi in the Greek, which means I am, which is the personal name of God given to Moses in the burning bush story in Genesis, as well as the claim that he's the Son of Man who sits at the right hand of God, he was clearly using the name Son of Man as a divine title reference from Daniel. He calls himself the Son of Man and identifies himself with the divine figure who receives glory and an eternal kingdom. Also, the vivid use of language of the Son of Man riding on the clouds of heaven is something only Yahweh does. For example, in Psalm 68:4, it describes Yahweh, the one who rides on the clouds. Christ is directly claiming to be God. The Pharisees' response shows this. Immediately, they claim that he is blaspheming and begin to mock and beat him. Clearly, they understood that he was making some kind of claim to divinity. Otherwise, they would not have reacted so angrily to Jesus. If the claim that here is spouted so often, that Christ never claimed to be God in the Synoptic Gospels, is true, why did the Sanhedrin react so violently to Christ calling himself the Son of Man and the I Am, which in the first century Jewish context had serious eschatological and theological significance? The whole claim that Jesus never claimed to be God in the Synoptics, or that the Synoptics have no divine Christology, is simply just false. The title Son of Man is not merely just a messianic title. It's a title of divinity, due to the associations with the title within Second Temple Jewish thought was that of a divine figure who is glorified alongside Yahweh and receives an eternal kingdom.